in general, as I was going through a lot of this stuff, there was one thing that came to my mind specifically. I mean, because it's obvious that when you're building something like this, I mean, just the very nature of it is, even if you were to look at it as a tool, right? You could use this tool for X, Y, or Z, and there's no real, just because it's powerful and capable, it doesn't mean that, the technology itself dictates its use. Okay. And I completely understand that. But in the grand scheme of things, a lot of what I see as it relates to Midnight, and I've said this several times because I believe it to be true. Maybe you'll argue me and tell me I'm wrong. I'm always right sometimes, Charles. You know that. Is how effectively do you think something like Cardano or Midnight could be used to bring in CBDCs? Because so much of that technology, while I know that the focal point of it is to be centralized and controlled and so forth, I still see a lot of avenues down Midnight and some of the ways it's being designed and all of these things. And I see how a CBDC could be rather effective on a lot, on both, really, if I'm honest. So is that something that you're cognizant of? Like, is this something that you've taken into consideration, or is there any reason why you might be saying absolutely, and I hope they do? Like, what is your stance on that?
Okay, so first off, if you truly believe in decentralization, you can't say I believe in decentralization until it violates my principles, and then at that point I get control and I get to centralize it and say no. If it's an open platform, you have a bunch of tools. There will be good and bad use cases on it. Bitcoin is this way, Ethereum is this way, Cardano is this way. If I had my preference, I would have tried to get rid of OneCoin and BitConnect and these types of things. But that's the consequence of it. So is it possible to deploy a CBDC in a ledger like Midnight? Sure, but it's certainly possible to also do that ZK Sync or other systems as well. And honestly speaking, the more likely scenario is that a CBDC would be run by a centralized ledger or a permission ledger like a Fabric, because they would want total control over it end to end. And they want to put protocol level backdoors. There aren't protocol level backdoors in Midnight. So that would put it low on the list of the implementation in practice when you talk about it. But then let's talk about an ethical CBDC. People don't have problems with CBDCs from the perspective of use, utility, and convenience. They have problems because you have transaction discrimination. So they discriminate based on who you are and what you're buying.
Exactly. So that's what bothers me.
That's what kills me too. I don't want to live in a world where we go to a gas station. I got my truck, my 2500 Chevy, and I go to fill it up with some diesel, and it says, well, you've already bought too much diesel this week and you're not allowed to buy any more. I don't want to live in that world. And that's the world that the ESG people are really pushing for. When you go to
I don't want AI telling me that I am not allowed to buy any more gas because I've driven my car too much and my carbon credits or whatever have been drained.
Right. And so systems like Midnight intrinsically are moving the opposite direction of that, because it gets harder and harder to know who you are and what you're buying with these types of things. So it's not the ideal technology for it. You could conceive of it with this tech stack, but they would much rather have a system where they have end-to-end control, protocol level backdoors that are inside the system. And they also run the ledger, and they can freeze and reverse transactions. You can't freeze or reverse transactions in Midnight in its instantiation. You can build it into a smart contract, some sort of scheme for that. We're using multi-sig, but generally speaking, it behaves like a blockchain, and that makes blockchains not suitable for CBDCs, which is why it's always a separate conversation. And in practice, even when they try to start with a blockchain, they tend to abandon it. For example, I was at the Swiss ambassador's house last year in DC, and the head of the People's Bank of China's digital currency initiative was there. So he was building the CBDC for China. I first said, hey, how big of a pilot is it? He's all very small. It's only 200 million people. So only in China is like a 200 million person pilot small. But they're building as a public-private partnership. Tencent is working with the PBOC, and they have a strong AI stack they're pulling in with social credit. So they're putting all those pieces together. So I said, are you using blockchain?
They're doing my biggest fear here in the States.
Yeah, exactly.
I wasn't aware of that, but it makes sense.
And so I said, hey, are you building on a blockchain? They said, we started with a blockchain, but we abandoned the blockchain component. So there's kind of a blockchain component, but it's a centralized server running the whole thing. A, because of the performance requirements, but B, because of the control requirements. The government basically wants to have God mode. God mode is not compatible with decentralization. So that's why we built things like EDI, because we wanted to create a world where every product is decentralized by default. The more decentralized, the harder it is to put God mode inside the system. And that makes it then not compatible with what CBDC social credit people want to do. Social credit also requires an ample amount of data of your users. If you move into a system that's privacy preserving, you lose unless they disclose all of that information. That's not compatible with how government works. They want to do dragnets and mass collection. They want hidden repositories of huge amounts of data without your consent to be able to harvest that data and use it. So this really is the fight of our time. And that's why I'm trying to move people into systems where you have to consent to give. Instead of it's automatically done and you have no way of opting out, which is unfortunately the way that Web 2 currently works for almost everything.
Right. Good. I like that. I like that. I like those answers, Charles. I still like you, man. I'm still down. No, seriously, I was reading some of this stuff and I'm like, what the hell am I reading right now? This shit is blowing my mind. I wasn't expecting to see some of that stuff, but I do understand. And like anything else, there's always two sides to any sword, and it can either be used to protect your home or rob a village, I guess. It just kind of depends on what your motives are with it.